proving that Noel Coward was right. To do an introduction for our next guest is a bit of a switch because he's been responsible for the musical introductions to many of the world's top stars. Judy Garland, Ella Fitzgerald, Bing Crosby, Danny Kaye, not to mention the Clan, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr. and of course the Governor Frank Sinatra. Ladies and gentlemen, one of America's leading musical talents, conductor and arranger, Nelson Riddle. Welcome. You're over in Britain to start a week in, I don't know, cabaret with Andy Williams and our other guest, Sarah Vaughan. Can I ask you, do you ever feel very much the second fiddle because you're the man behind the podium while the others are out the front being the stars?
I would be scared to death to do what they do.
Really?
Yep. I have my hands full doing my part of the show.
So it doesn't worry you that it's always somebody or other with Nelson Riddle in his orchestra?
I've had about 30 years to get used to the role, and I feel very comfortable in it now.
You started out as a piano player.
That's right.
And then switched.
I became a trombone player after a while. I worked with Tommy Dorsey, and it was somewhere along the way I got interested in arranging, so I used to play trombone and write arrangements too.
Now, you were with Dorsey.
Yeah.
Francis Albert Sinatra also sang with Dorsey. Did you work together?
No, our time with Tommy was separated by about 3 years. He left Tommy in 1941, and I joined Tommy in 1944.
A lot of people would say that the Nelson Riddle sound was important to Sinatra's career. Do you think you did enough, or did something, to help Frank Sinatra remake his career? Because there was that bit of a dive.
I think it was all, as most of life is, it was the timing. It was to be at the right place at the right time, and hopefully with the right notes.
The notes are important. Can I ask about your arranging technique? Because there is a Nelson Riddle sound, whether you know it or not. You can listen to something and say, oh, yeah, that's a Riddle record. Do you write for yourself or for the artist? Do you write Nelson Riddle with Ella Fitzgerald or with Frank Sinatra?
I think I always think of the artist first and try to do something which is most attractive for them and for the song they're singing. And that's why sometimes the sound varies slightly between artists or among artists. I know Nat Cole at one time sent a messenger back asking why I didn't write Frank Sinatra arrangements for him. And I told the messenger, who in this case was Lee Young, his drummer, I said, Lee, you just tell Nat that I think of him musically differently than I do Frank Sinatra. And I didn't hear anything about it again. It was all right. It was the right answer.
While we were having a glass of lukewarm white wine before the program, you told me about Nat Cole recording and a rather unlikely problem with a Nat Cole recording.
Well, it was in Chicago one summer, and we were recording an album on a Saturday afternoon at Universal Studios. And no one else was in the building except Nat and Lee Gillette, the producer from Capitol Records, and I in the orchestra. But they kept hearing this sound come through the walls, and they couldn't figure it out. So they had a fellow go around and check all the other recording studios, and surely enough, why, they were all empty. There wasn't anyone else recording on a Saturday afternoon there. And then somebody happened to get around the corner of Nat's music stand, and they found that he was indulging in one of the loves of his life. He was listening to a baseball game on a transistor radio.
He had a radio in the studio?
Yeah. He was a great fan of Henry Aaron. He loved Hank Aaron.
So he was a baseball fan, even if it meant interrupting a recording session?
Absolutely. Well, he didn't realize he was interrupting it, but he was a very, he carried himself very loosely. He didn't seem to worry about anything, and I think that came across in his singing style, too.
Because he was very much a musician's singer.
Yes, indeed. A very natural musician. You and I were talking about your dad a while ago, about the natural things that he does in his life because he's a musician. And Nat Cole had what they call absolute pitch, which is not unknown in music. A few people have it.
That means that basically he can literally hear a note in his head.
He can hear the note. And so mostly when you write an arrangement, you use an introduction for two reasons. One is to set the mood of the song, and the other is to give the singer the pitch.
Right, so you
well,
give him a
Nat,
chance, yes.
Nat could sing 30 songs in a row with no intro because he knew what the pitch was before he didn't have to be warned of it. It was all in his head.
Okay, fine. We're dealing with somebody who is a good singer, but you've worked in films and television.
Yeah.
There must have been times when you had to work with non-singers.
Yes.
I'm thinking, for instance, Paint Your Wagons, which you were involved with.
Well, Paint Your Wagon was one, certainly. Over here they had a hit record of a song called Wandering Star.
Oh,
And that was Lee Marvin, and I think he sounded like a bullfrog on it, but people enjoyed the sound of a bullfrog singing.
I just wonder, did anybody here buy that record?
It must have.
Yeah. Tone deaf as well as?
Must have been, must have been. And in the same picture, there was another non-singer named Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, but he doesn't need to sing.
Well, I'm not too sure Lee does. It just so happens they were cast in roles where they had to do some singing. I remember in an earlier film where I gave Cliff Robertson some advice about how to sing a song, and finally we wanted to use a voice dub, meaning somebody who could sing and Cliff could mouth to it, but he didn't want to do that. He sang his own song and he did it pretty well finally.
But what was somebody like Marvin like to work with recording?
Gruff.
We heard that.
A gruff. He has a gruff exterior and possibly an interior to match. He's a single-purposed individual, and he went on about his business and did a great job as an actor. But I don't think he took kindly to music lessons.
Of the people that you have worked with, who were the easiest to work with? I mean, you worked with Sinatra for 20-odd years.
Yeah.
I mean, was he easy to work with?
Not always, but he was always inspiring to work for, because he had the way of making you do your very best. And of course, since many of those efforts are captured on records, why I'm very happy that he did inspire me that way. Somehow he also tried very hard to do his best at given times, and that comes out too. And he is still trying his best wherever he's singing right now, because he's still very much in business.
Because a lot of people say that Frank Sinatra's voice is gone and that he should quit while he's ahead. Mm-hmm.
Mostly people who could never sing.
Yes, that's fair. You created some classic arrangements for Sinatra.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not being sycophantic when I say that I can put a record on that you maybe made 15 years ago and it's still as fresh today. Can I therefore ask you about the music today? You were quoted as saying of modern music that volume isn't quality. Mm-hmm. Do you feel therefore that current music trends are turn the volume up and belt the guitars and forget the music?
It's not that simple, no. There are some fine things being recorded now. But you just have to pick and choose your spots, just as you did when we were very active in the recording business. All the records we did with Frank, in spite of Frank's wonderful voice, weren't peaks. No. They weren't high spots. And while we were recording, there were many other people recording who were not contributing necessarily to quality, but were doing the same quantity. I think what people tend to do when they feel locked in a successful situation, and they feel very much part of an era of music that seemed to have quality as the watchword, they tend to forget that in that same era that they were recording, some of their efforts weren't of the best.